Dave.
Hi,
It's
Rebecca.
good to have you on again.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm very happy to be here.
Our guest today is David Kindopp. He's an author. He wrote the book Manana Doesn't Mean Tomorrow, which was really an adventure. And through that book, I realized that I wanted to get David to get on television more, and I wondered if he was writing more. And I found out he was.
I am.
Dave, tell us about your writing.
Well, right now I'm working on about 3 different books, but I'm working on one that the working title is called Tales from Mananaville, and I'm plagiarizing slightly Jimmy Buffett, Tales from Margaritaville, but it works, I think. And it's going to be a collection, it is a collection of short stories that are true, that are experiences that I've had in Mexico, mostly in and around Mazatlan, where I lived for the last couple of years. And I've had these experiences that have been, when they happen, just bizarre. And yet, you know, I keep having bizarre experiences in Mexico thinking it won't happen again, and then sure enough, the next day, something crazy happens that's worth writing about. And some of these stories are actually from 20 plus years ago when I took my sailboat to Mazatlan, because it was really wild and crazy then. And so some of those stories are firmly embedded in my memory, and so I've written some of those down as well.
Well, I want to tell everybody that I really love David's writing, and I see in David's writing something that sometimes I think he doesn't see himself. I see humanity basically stripped naked in our faith, our fear, our ridiculousness, our lack of logic, and the comedy of really being ourselves, and the tragedy of being ourselves. And I think that wittingly or unwittingly, David exposes this.
Yeah, unwittingly, probably.
And that's why I love your writing.
Yeah. Well, and thank you again. And I have to. I think I should say that I try also to paint everybody I write about with the same broad brush, including me. And I don't spare myself in terms of my foibles either. You know, people criticize me when they recognize themselves in my writing, sometimes vehemently. But when they read about me screwing up, they don't say anything. It's like, okay.
But we all screw up.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's the comedy and the joy and the wisdom of it.
Oh, sure.
Is to realize that.
Sure. Yeah.
And you bring it together with some really thought-provoking stuff, even if you don't mean to. Just the adventure that you write about for the day or for the story.
Right.
Each one brings out something very thought-provoking to think about who we are, what we're doing, and what we think, or the question is, do we think?
Right. Well, I really believe that every time we have an experience, especially if it's a little bit out of the ordinary, and not often ordinary experiences, but the further we stretch the boundaries and push the envelope, the more we have an opportunity to think about who we are and what we're doing as individuals and as humanity.
True, but most of us go through life thinking about what didn't go right rather than how to make things go right. Your book just pointed out so many little details of human nature of that kind that we really could, if we thought about, sail the ship in a little better direction, but we don't. We don't. And in some things, you so carefully point out that we really should. Whether you realize it or not, you point that out like, okay, where are we going with this certain behavior? What is it going to lead us to? What is tomorrow? What about mañana?
Right.
Is it really going to come? It is going to come. Oh my gosh, it's not a myth anymore.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to come. And, you know, like the old saying, our karma's going to run over our dogma.
Right.
So,
Right. And I do try to just have fun with it too. I mean, I try to have fun with it and make it light and entertaining most of the time. I mean, some subjects are serious, and I do weave in a little bit of philosophy and some seriousness in some of my stories, of course, but I really try to have it be interesting and entertaining, and you know, it isn't War and Peace, that's for sure. but hopefully it will make one think a little bit about what's going on in the world and what they're doing and what I'm doing.
I think that's what makes you a really good writer. The fact that you can provoke us into thinking while you're making us laugh.
And like everything else, some people actually agree with you and some people do not.
Well, perhaps we find in it what we seek, but it can't be found if it isn't there.
Right, right. So the story I have in mind, the title is called Garbage Juice. And I had no clue about a title when I started this little short. It's a very short story. And the reason for being there in that location in the first place wasn't actually to go write about anything, which is often the case, of course. You know, my friend Roberto and I, who shows up in some of my stories because he's my Mazatlan buddy, we went out to the dump, you know, to look for a commodity. We actually went out looking for tin cans, empty tin cans, because my friend thought that she might want to start a business with making candle holders out of, and lanterns out of old tin cans, because we'd seen them and she'd seen them in another part of Mexico. I thought, okay, Roberto and I, we're going to go out to the dump and we're going to see about buying tin cans. Well, of course, that led to a whole another crazy adventure, and we drove out in his old van. We went to the actual dump, and we parked and asked a bunch of questions about who we could buy tin cans from, and we got the runaround, the typical Mexican runaround. And from there I could see in the distance these giant garbage trucks lumbering off into the distance and unloading the real icky garbage. We're in my friend Roberto's van, and I watched these, you know, big garbage trucks, typical garbage trucks, going past us, and dust is billowing, and they're going down this muddy road, and they're kind of disappearing behind a couple of hills, and then I see them appear in the distance, and then they're offloading this real ugly garbage. And there are people out there like little ants scurrying around and doing whatever they do, poking through that. And as it turns out, what they do is these folks poke through the garbage, and then they bring everything with any kind of potential value across the road to the basuron, which is where the people live and work with this garbage. So we find that out. We drive across the main road. We go down into this basuron, into these tar paper shacks and concrete block buildings that are part recycling and part where people live, and there are all these people doing these different things with this garbage. There was a young man, probably 10 years old, with a grinder cutting off the straw ends of brooms that were no good anymore and stacking up the broom handles all for some kind of use. They had value. That was his currency. We went and talked, and we're still on our quest for these tin cans, and so we drive around in this little funny village, and there's a truck parked with so much stuff on it you can't even see it's a truck, a big truck. Roberto had to say, "You see that truck over there?" And it's like, "I don't see that truck." There's a chair sitting up on the side of the road, an easy chair with chickens, you know, hanging on it, and just a real assault on your perceptions about Mexico, even though I'd lived there and I knew a fair amount about Mazatlan, Mexico. And I'm always interested in going to those kinds of places that a lot of gringos don't visit. And so we're looking for the tin cans. We show up at this place. There's piles of tin cans, and there's guys working on this truck, and Roberto's with me, of course, and we make introductions and we shake hands. And what I see is that these people are just really genuine, nice human beings. I'm there. I don't know how many gringos ever show up there. Probably not many. I've heard there's a couple of women who run a school somewhere in the bushes, but I've never seen that. And they're so kind and warm and generous. And it's not like they're your waiter at the beachfront restaurant and they think they're going to get a big tip. They're not. They're just doing what they do every day. So we make a deal for these tin cans, and I can buy the kilo, right? So I bought 4 or 5 cans just to see how they would fit for the project, and it was like 2 pesos, you know, it's just 3 cents or I don't know what, not much. And it was all the time, it was these people coming and going and living their lives in this, in the residual of the dump. And it was so, I felt honored to be there and to be accepted and to be able to be with those people. I mean, I'm going to go back and do more homework and spend more time out there and really find out what some of those folks' lives are about, because I think we need to know that. Garbage juice. Before we go across the road to the Basaron, we're driving out of where the trucks are dumping, and we're driving out back to the main road, and we stop, and there's this, it's a dirt road, and it winds along, and there are these little hills on either side of us, and they're green hills. And Roberto stops, and he says, "What do you think those are?" And I look up, and I said, "They're little green hills." And he says, "No, that's garbage. That's mountains and mountains of garbage." And I look up, and sure enough, upon closer observation, you can see pieces of vinyl or something sticking out of the bushes. And then along the road on each side, and meandering back and forth, seeking the low spots, as liquid does, is this black, red ooze. It looks like crude oil. That I would imagine what crude oil looks like. And it's oozing down this road. And you can see it, when you start to look, it's seeping out of these mountains, out of these hills. And it's literally this decomposing garbage, God knows what's in there. And it's creating this black ooze, and then there's this red cinnabar looking stuff that comes along with it on the sides. And it's just, we had our masks on, we had our white masks on, we took just to be safe. And so I don't really, and we had Vicks Vapor Rub all over them when we first got there, so I didn't really smell anything, but I can imagine what it must have smelled like. And it just struck me so strongly that here they are mounding up this garbage with no real way to do anything with it, but just mound it up and let it decompose and emit this garbage juice, you know. It was so amazing to see that. And here across the road, people are living and working in it. They're living and working. It goes across the road. They drive back and forth across it. Who knows what it is and, you know, what it really does in terms of seeping into the ground. And, you know, the environmental aspects are just beyond belief. And within a quarter of a mile from the edge of all this, there's all these new houses going in. Just row after row after row of new houses and new streets. And it's they probably built on a lot of that stuff. And if they're not, I can't imagine what the groundwater must be like. The ground must be saturated with that stuff. So all that, you know, innocent little reason to go out there and look for tin cans created this vision and this view of what was going on, you know, on the outskirts of Mazatlan that I think probably very, very few gringos ever have a clue about. And I just thought it was really fascinating. And I wanted to mention that. I wanted to make people aware that that was going on. And of course, then I alluded to, you know, the environmental problem in general in the world. I mean, we have the Pacific, the Atlantic Gyre patch, I guess, that's the floating garbage the size of Texas, and we don't seem to be fixing that. And I think I concluded that piece with, I wonder if whatever creatures survive after we've killed the planet are going to be wallowing in our garbage juice, because some creatures probably will survive, and they're going to be, you know, scurrying around in all the detritus we leave behind when we've fouled the planet and we can't be here anymore. So those are the things I wanted to expose or just talk about. And yet, you know, I try to do it in a lighthearted manner so that people wouldn't get, you know, really bummed out about it.
Dave, when you talked about garbage in Mazatlan, of course you brought out in the end that we all human beings produce garbage.
Right.
Some areas handle it less properly than others, but we as human beings don't seem to be able to handle it very well. We're a throwaway society. Every time an appliance breaks, if it's a small one, it's usually cheaper to throw it away than to fix it.
Right.
So we perpetuate garbage.
Right.
And ironically, that's kind of a symbol of mental, emotional, physical, and intellectual garbage as well.
Yeah, true, true.
So our thinking about, oh, let's do it easy and never mind the cause and effect, not on the economy, not on the environment, not on the people, not on the life of the planet. And whether you realized it or not, you brought these focuses into your story without the direct, obvious approach. So the story became penetrating and thought-provoking for me, and I think for everyone that read it. The first thing you think is, oh my gosh, well, you know, it's okay, it's in Mazatlan. But it's not okay. It's not just in Mazatlan, is it?
Right, no, absolutely not. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And what's interesting in terms of, you know, garbage is obviously most of us know that we export, or I don't know if we still do, but I know that we have been. We've been exporting a lot of our garbage to China for recycling and processing. And there are huge sections in, I think, southern China that are just that are poisoned areas, that are dead areas from all of our electronics that people are picking apart. I mean, that's just phenomenal to me. You know?
Wow, and I don't think the average person knows that. I didn't. I didn't know that.
Oh,
Of
yeah.
course, I can't judge the average person by me. That would not be right.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, there's a lot to know. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, right? But,
there's a lot to know.
Oh yeah, it's just crazy that we're doing that. I mean, everywhere we're doing that. And I don't know. I mean, I guess the United States has got a better handle on that. But if we keep, I mean, I guess we do. But I guess in New York City, they're still taking barges out to the ocean full of garbage. I mean, I don't know if they're still doing that or not. But I know they were. You know.
Oh, that's sick.
How else does the garbage patch in the middle of the Atlantic get to be the size of Texas?
Well, you know, a lot of people assume it's the currents that are picking up the plastic, and it's primarily plastic from the earthquake in Japan, and there's a whole lot of theories on it. However, we could mine that plastic. We could take barges out there and mine it on location.
Sure.
And we could make things as simple as, you know how we used to have the tinker toy or interlocking blocks?
Right.
We could make interlocking fence blocks
Yeah.
to use forever because they would be really solid.
Right.
And you know, when you go through everywhere, we've got fences everywhere that rot, decay. Now I realize that people would say, well gee, you're putting the wooden fences out of business, but we're putting the wooden fences out of business anyway. We're running out of trees.
Right.
We're running out of trees.
Right.
So we could make fence blocks
Sure.
that we could put together in any form and have nice, good fences that would last a long, long time and use that garbage. It is usable. It's recyclable in that manner. That's just one idea.
Right.
There are a whole lot of ideas. We need to start using the content. Why is our garbage going to China for them to rebuild it? The thing is, we ship it over there and China buys it. Okay, well maybe that's good, maybe that's not good, but we really need to know how to handle what we have in a better way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because there's big holes for garbage juice.
Yeah, and it's not, obviously there's a lot of garbage juice on the planet. It's not just on the
Yeah.
outskirts of Mazatlan.
Yeah, there's
Right.
big holes for garbage juice, and the smell and the decay and the illness that can come from that. What are we doing?
Right. Oh, yeah.
You know, we don't think a lot about our garbage, but like I say, all the little appliances, the way it is, it's cheaper to throw them away and buy another one to have them fixed.
Right.
And that is a mountain of garbage. For how long? For how long, Dave?
Yeah, right. I don't know. I mean, that's...
A long, long time.
Yeah. I've spoken with people who are concerned about their kids and their grandkids. You know, what have we left them? You know, and I think anything you can do to make people more aware, well, you know, because somebody somewhere, it just takes a lot of little changes and things will be much better.
We keep hoping that our children and our grandchildren will rise above our ignorance. But if we have so much pollution on the planet that they can't live, how are they going to rise above that?
Right. Yeah. No, it's a question. It's a big question.
It's a really big question.
I mean, I think the U.S. is getting better. I mean, I haven't studied it. I haven't researched it. You know, I mean, I just took my little trip to the dump and wrote my piece. You know, but
Right.
I mean, I think it's getting better all the time. But How much better? I have no clue. You know?
I like the way that you brought out in your story that everybody was equal there in the dump and in life.
Right.
Here these people were trying to make the very best they could of what they had, and in so doing, they were making the best they could out of reusing the garbage and
Right.
doing something with it.
Right.
A lot of people overlook that point. They say, oh yuck, they live in a garbage dump, they gotta live someplace.
Right.
And if we don't watch what we're doing, a lot of the world is gonna live in a garbage dump.
Right. Oh yeah.
Because we're gonna make it a big garbage dump.
Yeah.
We, in a way, are dying of greed.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that.
We're dying of greed. He who has the most money wins,
Right,
and
right.
to heck with the consequences.
Right.
And that is really, really stupid. We're not, well maybe we are, but tell me, what's your opinion? Are we the intelligent species?
You know, I don't know. I was with my friends the other day, and I wrote another piece called "You're Not a Dog Person, Are You?" And I really upset probably every dog owner in Mazatlan when I wrote that. And yet I like dogs. And in fact, I'm visiting my friends, and their little dog came around the other day and looked at me, and I said to the dog, I said, well, how are you? You know, I thought to myself, hey, you know, how's it going, little dog? And then I thought to myself, I don't know, man. The dog looked at me like, what are you thinking? What are you talking about? I'm not a dog, you know. And I thought, and it reminded me of Wayne Dyer's old expression about we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I thought, and I got it from the dog. It's like the dog is saying, look, man, I'm a spiritual being having a dog experience. And I think, yeah, and I mean, I vote for dolphins as being smarter than we are, absolutely.
Well, I think a lot of people feel that has been proven.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah.
Their sensitivity level, their ability to hear, and I would call it extrasensory perception level from where our thinking is,
Right.
is much more profound than ours. And a lot of animals' extrasensory perception is much more profound than ours.
Right.
Look at the way they behave before earthquakes.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's noted worldwide. And I thought it was real interesting. I was listening to a scientist, and I will not use his name, because for such a brilliant man, I was amazed that he said that animals do not think.
Oh wow.
And I thought, where have you been?
Yeah.
Where have you been? Dogs
Right.
will start looking for their owner coming home. When they're coming home at an unusual time, when they're not expected, they'll be waiting at the door all excited, knowing
Right.
that
Right.
they're coming home. There's so much of us, so many of us, thousands of us, that have experienced those things that statements like they don't think aren't computing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And if we don't think that other life forms have any validity except for our use, we're the ones not thinking.
Oh yeah, I agree, and I think I find it fascinating that because we can talk, somehow we think that we are the most intelligent species. But I think we don't get it that all kinds of intelligence is communicating without even having to talk. So how far advanced are we? Really. Yeah, and it's funny because I wrote this piece just recently. I wrote this piece about bugs in my eyes, about the dog, the exhilaration is worth getting the bugs in your eyes for the dog. And I mentioned when I was riding to Mexico with my golden lab, and I lightheartedly mentioned that the dog has his head out the window, and he looks at me like, well, why don't you have your head out the window? And by the way, why don't you turn up the music and sing a little louder? I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Right.
But putting your head in the wind got me thinking about, our heads in the wind. And so I started thinking about, which I've thought about before, is how fast we were really going. And I went into the fact that the Earth is rotating on this axis at over 1,000 miles an hour, and the sun, we're rotating around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour, and the sun is going through our galaxy, the Milky Way, is going through galaxies at 558,000 miles an hour. It's some ungodly number. So when you put it all together, we're really going, I don't know the number exactly, but when you put it all together, we're sitting here and we're zooming along at like 1,200,000 miles an hour. in aggregate. So we've really got our heads out the window. I mean, we have our head in the breeze, and we don't even know it.
No.
You know, we don't even know it.
No.
And certainly, and I don't know, and I mentioned in this piece, you know, obviously some people aren't going to be convinced that their soul decided to come into this physical experience. You know, that might not sit well with some religious people, you know, who believe differently. But it doesn't matter what you think about how we got here. The fact is, we're here, and it is one hell of a ride. And so let's appreciate it, you know, and
Right.
let's understand it, you know. And little things come to mind, and like 1,258,000 miles an hour while we're sitting here, and then when you get in the convertible and you add 55 miles an hour to that, then that's mind-boggling, right? I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's worth thinking about. I think it's worth thinking about.
Well, then we think, wow, if we're going that fast, I better not put my head out the window.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that again, it's easy to get sidetracked with being uncomfortable with contrast instead of recognizing it as a benefit and a great thing. That's what I like about people who live in Mazatlan, Mexico, gringos, you know, people in the United States and Canada. Those folks have definitely taken the view that some contrast is good, because you don't move to a foreign country without appreciating contrast. Absolutely. And that's fun. You have that in common with most of those people that are there, which is really great. You know, you may not have anything else in common with them. I've seen people from totally different walks of lives there become friends because they're there. You know, it's really interesting. Yeah, it's like you know, if you're tied up in the harbor in Papeete in your sailboat, you're friends with everybody there before you even meet them because you have 80% of your life in common. And I really appreciate those kind of people that embrace the contrast and not only embrace it, but they create it. Yeah. You know, it's interesting how I was just compelled to get a boat and take it to Mexico. And, you know, obviously that turned out interestingly, you know, I mean, that turned out to be a 3-year, the best of times and the worst of times kind of experience, you know. But it's true, I look back at that and I think, boy, I got $1 million experience and it only cost me, you know, a couple $100,000.
I want to thank you for coming in and letting us do this, because you're always fun